Okay, hello. My name is Andrew, and today we're doing another interview for the series I've been working on here at YouTube about the my writer interview series on kind of publishing and writing talks. And today I'm very excited to be joined by KL Somniate, or KLS, who is a writer of character-driven sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. So it's great to have somebody else who's kind of working in the speculative fiction space. So K.L. Somniate is the author of Borderlines, Seven Deadly Habits of the Modern Demon Summoner, and Memoirs of the Mausoleum. These are available for purchase now on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. Yeah, so K.L., it's great to be that you've been able to join us today. So would you like to talk to us a little bit about your latest published book?
Okay. Seven Deadly Habits of the Modern Demon Summoner. That's the first title for the first series, the first book in the series. The series is just called Seven Deadly Habits, and it's probably easier to just refer to it as that since it's less of a mouthful. Um, fun story about the title. It was actually originally Seven Habits. And but then I realized that there is actually a copyright on Seven Habits because the book that most people associate it with is like the Seven Habits of was it, most
Highly
effective
successful people.
highly successful people. Yeah. And I remember I looked that up and I was like, ah, shoot, I can't use that. I gotta add another thing in there. So that's why the name it's gone through a few things, a few changes just because I was worried about that, and all my friends were kind of like brainstorming new names for it. But so Seven Deadly Habits is an urban fantasy. It was sort of a romance at first, but then I realized at the end that I didn't really have a happily ever after for the main sort of focused couple, and I realized you can't call it a romance if there's no happily ever after. Most romance writers find that to be very annoying, and I've seen that very often, people expressing that sentiment.
So I think romance,
Um,
yeah, romance readers
yeah.
have that. It's not a genre I'm very familiar with, but I suppose romance readers expect there to be a happy ending at the end of the book, essentially.
They
It's
do, yes. Yeah.
okay, okay, yeah.
And as a writer, I sometimes look at, subreddits related to editing, writing, and query letters. And I remember that one of the authors there who was actually represented said outright, if it doesn't have a happily ever after, it's not a romance, just call it urban fantasy. And I was like, fair enough. I guess I will just call it urban fantasy. Um, but anyway, it was a passion project of mine. I wrote it right after. This is just funny to me. I wrote it right after I got LASIK eye surgery. So the month after that, I was not resting my eyes. I was writing a sort of fevered pitch because I just had this idea about. Well, I've always wanted to write a story about demons and demon summoning, and because I have this sort of when I write books, I tend to have like a combat system in mind. So I like to write fight scenes and I like to write action. So I had these ideas for demon summoning as sort of a fight mechanic, and I really wanted to write a story about that, but I couldn't think of of like a actual like thing to hinge it on. So I kind of just left it in the bowels of my mind. But then I sort of had this idea like, what if I wrote about this character who has to sort of fight his way through his exes to try to fulfill this hit like this contract against someone who his client has a personal grudge, not really a business grudge against. And then I kind of mixed this idea of like John Wick, right, with Scott Pilgrim versus the World, right? Scott Pilgrim's whole thing is fighting his current girlfriend's exes, and the John Wick angle. I've always liked the John Wick movies. I just thought like why don't I combine those, and then I can add the demon part that I've been wanting to add to my sort of mythos all this time. And I sort of pounded through that, and the result is sort of this messy, chaotic, but I'd like to think fun world where he's constantly running into past jilted lovers, and it's going to be sort of like an adventure through the city itself. And that's why urban fantasy, I know people are always saying is a dead genre, and it's like, well, if it's dead, I still have to I still have to write what I want to write, and that's kind of where I went with the Seven Deadly Habits. So
I think that's true. That ultimately you have to write what you're passionate about yourself. And I suppose genres kind of die, but they do come back again.
yeah.
I think that's an interesting kind of combination in terms of comp titles to have John Wick meets Scott Pilgrim versus versus the world. It's a nice combination. Yeah, and Yeah, the fight thing is kind of interesting as well. Like I suppose I kind of like writing quite scenes that are quite tense in my writing, but um, yeah, I'm not sure if I've done that many action scenes, but um, and do you find that kind of interesting to kind of structure kind of in writing? Because I know I sometimes feel that some novels with a lot of action scenes kind of feel like frustrated films, where like somebody wants to make a movie, but it's kind of they just have the budget to write a book. But do you feel there's something particular about kind of writing action scenes in kind of in that kind of in the medium of the novel that kind of appeals to you? Or,
Um, yeah, I'll admit that, I'm a big fan of movies and that I really love I love a good action scene, and that's probably why when I write I tend to have this image of, well, this fight would go this way. I try to balance that though with like knowing that writing is not a visual medium, so like you have to imagine it, and people when they read a fight scene, sometimes they can get their eyes can sort of glaze over, they can be like, oh, this is going too long. So I try to like angle that to have the fight scene coincide with like emotional things that are happening between the characters. And that's why this book was so fun to write, because in my original series in Memoirs of Mausoleum, obviously I wrote that when I was 17, so I was a little dumb and a little bit inexperienced, and it's a bit of a hot mess now looking back on it. But a lot of the fight scenes from that were very much tied to the character's development and relationship with that character. So in this one, it's like that, but I like to think a lot more refined than it used to be, where all as he's fighting his exes, you understand why like it's a familiar dance for them, because all of his exes are assassins, right? They're all assassins and demon summoners. So they all have like a complicated relationship with him. So certain characters, if they had a really like adversarial relationship from the start, their fight scene is going to be a lot more brutal. There's going to be a lot more sort of like knuckle dragging and like sort of breaking bones and things like that. And then people who he had a more like cordial relationship, it's a lot more distant, it's less personal. So I try to like infuse that kind of character into the fight scene, so it's not just like, oh, he's throwing a punch and this guy's countering. Like it's always going to have some element of like, well, why did this sort of come about, like why did this situation come around. But I'll fully admit that when I wrote this one, I definitely was thinking of like an action scene, and a lot of my beta readers were saying like, I like the story. It makes me think of like, as soon as I accepted that it was like an action movie, I kind of could picture it all in my head. And I was like, yeah, I need to start with like a warning, like this is like an action movie. Try to imagine it like that, because you know,
yeah,
I
yeah.
should probably be writing movies, but I like the medium of novels, just because with the movie you have to really see it like a movie, and like with novels I can go as much into something as I want or as little, and I get to pick and choose like what I decide to elaborate on and what I decide to let you kind of think about on your own.
Yeah, I mean, when you're writing a novel, you have that kind of extreme level of kind of self-control, or sorry, not self-control, that extreme level of control over what you're creating, I suppose. Yeah. I just brought that up as it's kind of a recurring thing of interest to me that I suppose kind of films compared to novels, I suppose, because there's such kind of low barriers of entry to writing a novel. Yeah, I suppose there are people who kind of you can feel that they might kind of prefer to work in film, or I kind of deliberately write stuff that's kind of almost unfilmable as well. But I guess even with action scenes, though, I mean, writing can be, although action scenes can be a very visual medium, I suppose, because novels are well suited to kind of describing internal states. Like if someone breaks their leg, like during a fight, I mean, you can kind of describe, how that feels. You're going to more depth about how it affects the person, I suppose, in writing than I suppose you can easily do in film. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a really cool idea. I love the comm titles, like um. So and yeah, that's available for on Amazon, right? For on Kindle or in hard copy as well, is it? Or
It is not in hard copy yet. Hard copy should release December 5th. Um, the Unfortunately, Amazon only offers ebooks for pre-order, and I wasn't even going to do a pre-order, but people on Twitter were like, it'll help you boost your sales on the day of, and I was like, I might as well. But so far, most people have indicated to me that they want the hard copy. Like the people who are interested in it on Tumblr and on Twitter have said like, we just want to buy the physical copy to get my hands on it, and I was like, okay, maybe next time I won't do a pre-order. It doesn't seem like there's any real point to it other than to sort of hype it up before. But honestly, I probably shouldn't have left some of the. I still have some work to do and I realized a little too late, like I needed to focus on this month for promotion, and I've been distracted, so I haven't been able to do that. So next time I probably won't do a pre-order, or if I do, it'll be better planned.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'll certainly be looking forward to reading the book. Anywho, great. So, I suppose with this series, I like to talk about kind of unpublished work, in particular. So just kind of on that, is there a kind of previous work, like say novels or stories that you tried to get published but were unable to, or you didn't have success in sort of putting them out there?
Oh yes, yes, there are. So Memoirs of the Mausoleum, that was totally self-published. When I was a teenager, I honestly, I tried to submit that book to a few agents. Mostly got turned down. I submitted to a few publishing houses. I submitted to this one called John Hunt Publishing, which basically said, we like this story generally, but we think it's kind of risky. So like but also they were asking like, why would they need our help to publish when they have more followers than us? And the reason I say that is because, I mentioned the fact that I had 18,000 followers on Tumblr. That was at the time. Now it's more like 22,000. But at the time, I kind of like asked myself, I was like, wait, why am I asking? Like, why do I need to be published by a small publisher? I might as well just self-publish and see where I go from there. And it was actually a pretty like reasonable success considering how bad my marketing strategy was, which is why I'm, trying the self-publishing thing again. But I'll fully admit that so the last project that I worked on was a huge mess. It was a 160,000 word sci-fi novel, and it was kind of like it was it was written very, very riskily. It was written in first person, and it had shifting perspectives, and it had so many characters, and like so much like world building to cover. And when I was writing it, I was really enjoying writing it, but I didn't realize how bad it looked to like agents, to like publishers, right? And that's the thing that like I had to come to terms with, because I'm a little bit dumb, a little bit slow. I didn't realize that like it's not just that it like the world is good, or that like the story is good. You have to like really present it in a way that like the audience can like actually get immersed in the world. So I was so confused as to why I was getting so many rejections. I was like, it's such an interesting like concept. But then, I looked back and I said, actually, never mind. This is actually kind of hard to follow if you're not already living in my brain. And I'm obviously the only person living in my brain. But anyway, I can tell you a little bit about the project. It was called Mercury Class, and it was basically about these people living in an underground society, and
Sorry, Mercury clouds, did you say?
Mercury Class. Yep, it
Mercury
was.
cloud. Okay.
Yeah, I cut it down to 105,000 words, but it was still a behemoth of a book. I had a couple of beta readers on it, and I really love those guys because I can't believe they got the entire thing. But it was basically a sci-fi underground society on an alien planet, and the idea was that the aliens come down from the surface to attack the society, and in order to fight them, they had to sort of bioengineer human-alien hybrids who would basically act as like a warrior class to protect them. And it was basically about that warrior class and how they kind of take to their duties and how they fit into that society. And it's a very outlandish idea. I know it's silly, but I always like those kind of. I will always like people being able to turn into monster kind of ideas. And with sci-fi settings, it's always going to be something like that, where it's like, oh, to become a monster, like what kind of human being would you still be inside? And like, so most of the story was like centered around this character named Salem, who is a new Mercury, and he's just getting used to the fact that he's a Mercury. To become one, you have to undergo this surgery that will probably kill you. Like it's a high percentage, high risk surgery, and he's just amazed to be alive. And basically, it's sort of him meeting his squad and meeting the other Mercury squads. And I like to think that the story was pretty decent, just in terms of like intrigue and like what kind of like world building I had. But I'll admit that I didn't present it in the best way, and that's why I ended up scrapping it after I got a bunch of rejections. And I looked back at it and I said, oh, this is a mess. And if I want to write the story, which I do want to write it again in the future, it's going to have to be totally rewritten and sort of totally reworked. And that's why I kind of shelved it, because I realized like I think I might have said this on Twitter before, and I do mean it. I kind of consider Mercury Class to be sort of my magnum opus. Like I have not actually like written it yet, but I know that the story idea is really solid. I can't write it at the moment because there's so many things and so many working parts of it that I don't know how to tackle at the moment because I have so many when I write a story, I don't just write one self-contained story. I have like a million ideas and I have the beginning and the end game and all the middle parts plotted out. But, you know, it's hard for me to like actually end a story after one book, and that's why I need to sort of go back and fix it up and try. And before I even try to get it published traditionally, I would have to completely revamp how the opening starts and you know but I'm still kind of committed to the first person multiple perspective because I know what I want to do with that. I want to have unreliable narrators and I want to have people lying deliberately and you sort of have to figure out who's telling the truth. I just think that's interesting. Again, it's risky, but like I said, in the future I'm going to tackle it and try it again. But yeah, that book didn't obviously didn't do well on when I was querying. And I don't blame them because they probably just thought it was a big hot mess. And it's like, yeah, it was. Um, Also in terms of in terms of like scrapping books and unpublished stuff, Seven Deadly Habits, I queried that for about a year. I had some more success with this one. I had a couple of requests. I've had, people who said like, I love the concept, but I'm not sure about the writing style, or I love the idea, and it seems like it would be really great, but like, I'm not like too into urban fantasy right now. So like, I had better feedback on this one. I actually had like personalized responses, which I did not have for the other one. And but ultimately, I think one of a couple of the subs just the requests they didn't they didn't give me a personalized rejection. A couple did, and they said like, we like you know, the characters, but the plot feels very like fast paced and um, so ultimately I was kind of, I was going to shelve it, but then I thought like, why don't I just self-publish it? I haven't self-published anything since 2018. I have fans on Tumblr, I have friends and, people who have expressed that they loved gallows humor and, they said like, when's the next book coming out? And it's like, if I was going to traditionally publish, it would take like 3-4 years anyway. So I might as well give something to my fans who already exist. And I have like a bunch of other plans for books in the future. And I was thinking that if I can, because when I first wrote Gallows Humor, I didn't really track how many copies I sold in the first year or in the subsequent years, right? It's only recently actually that I even looked, and then that's when I realized, oh shoot, I actually sold a good amount of copies the first time around. So for this one, it's like I'd like to get a good number of sales so that in my next sort of query letter to agents, I can say like in my first year, I sold this many books because obviously for the other one, I didn't really keep a good track. This time I want to like make a more concentrated effort to market and to utilize my audience better and to, get them interested in a concept that I think that, the people of Tumblr are a little different than say the people on like Twitter. They have a very different vibe over there and they tend to focus on certain things more, like LGBT content and like, they like the more fantasy, aspects of, fiction. I feel like I didn't really market myself very well the last time. So this time I have a much more marketable concept and I have a lot more strategies to try to sell this book. And that's why I went the self-publishing route because I didn't think that just because traditional publishing rejected it, I didn't think that it didn't still need a shot when it comes to self-publishing. So sorry, that was very
Okay.
long-winded.
No, no, it's good. So I mean, yeah, with the marketing strategy, yeah, you're trying to kind of measure things, and so you kind of take that forward to the next level with your next book, etc., which makes sense. I'm glad you mentioned beta readers as well, yeah, which they can be very useful. I mean, the book I'm currently revising a novel for a small independent publisher, but yeah, it was quite uncompromising in that it kind of shifts between second person and first person plural, and it can take a while to get into because it kind of shifts between kind of virtual reality simulations and kind of the reality of the stories in the near future. And in some ways, it's more surreal than the virtual reality simulations are. They're kind of more realistic at times. So it was very useful to have input from beta readers for that in my own experience as well, just in terms of them kind of giving pointers on how to, I suppose, just how to orient the reader better. But even in terms of the suggestions I got for revising the novel, I think they've been helpful as well in terms of even just like having a list of characters because it shifts like your own book, like it kind of shifts between different perspectives in every chapter. And again, you have people who are kind of unreliable or they exaggerate things or downplay other things around kind of the same events. So Yeah, I think it's kind of I've had a similar experience. The beta readers can be great if you're, yeah, if you're particularly if you're very in the novel and in your own brain when writing it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
for Mercury class, I definitely like I had a friend who was a very, very passionate about my writing just because we met on the like Archive of Our Own, and she just followed me from there. Um, she was funny because she actually did like a line by line read, which is what was incredible to me. So she basically was like suggesting how to like improve certain lines from the book, and like she had really good suggestions because I tend to be a little bit like overly expressive when I'm writing in first person, and she was like, you know, you're not very used to writing in first person. Let me help you out with that. But like, I mean, you're right though, where that like sometimes as a writer you don't realize how you come across to other people, and you don't understand like that like a person who is new to this world who doesn't know these characters needs certain like guides to the character immediately. I kind of just throw you right in there, and you're just sort of expected to figure out like what's going on, who these people are, like what the situation is, and that's why I really had to like rewrite that book because Mercury class was such a mess in terms of like actually accumulating the writer, you know, acclimating the writer to, I mean, the reader to, you know, the world. So that's why beta readers are really, really helpful. And that's what, you know, I hope to avoid certain pitfalls in the future. Definitely relying more on beta readers. So.
yeah. And then is there some work that I suppose you mentioned kind of submitting to different kind of agents and publishers, etc. And you know, the I suppose the experience nearly all writers have, or writers who aren't already famous, like for, already famous for something else, where you know submitting a lot of work and you know facing rejection because you know I mean agents and publishers are inundated with submissions. But is there any work, are there any pieces of writing that you wrote and then just decided yourself that you felt you didn't want to publish them, either because you weren't happy with it or you were concerned about how people might react to it or anything, even if you were happy with it on your own terms?
Um, I don't know. I was a little late to the game. So okay, so some of the more ambitious writers, right? They started writing novels at like 14, 15. I really for the years I was in high school, I really took a break from writing. Like I was a big writer before that. Like I wrote a lot of fan fiction. I wrote a lot of like just personal projects. But I kind of took a big break during high school. I wasn't doing that great mentally, so I really wasn't writing a whole lot then. It was really like my senior year that I suddenly decided like I would start writing memoirs, and that didn't get published till my first year of college. So like I've always kind of like in terms of novel writing, I'm used to writing novels since I wrote three of Gallows Humor. I wrote two books for another sequel series to Gallows Humor, and then I wrote Borderlines, which is a standalone book. So I'm used to writing books, but like the traditional publishing field, I am relatively new to though, because I started doing that when I was 23. I'm 25 now. Um, basically, that's I really only had two books that I queried, and like I haven't actually written any books that like I just decided like, oh, I'm not going to query this, or oh, I'm not, oh, I'm gonna just self-publish this, or maybe I won't self-publish this. For the most part, I've written books just for myself initially, and then I decided I'd like to break into traditional publishing, and that's where Mercury Class and Seven Deadly Habits came in. But those two, obviously, the first one failed miserably, the other one failed only slightly better, and now I'm kind of on this track of I have multiple story ideas, but like I don't think any of them are like books I would just keep to myself. Like I put a lot of work into my books, like whether that's revising the story content or doing a lot of editing. And it's like that work, I feel like that has to go to something. Like obviously I'm a creative. I love to make things. I love to just have a finished product, but I still need to see it in some form in the world. Like I can't just shelve it or stuff it in my closet because, I feel like even if just my audience sees it, that's enough for me. And I know that some writers, writers who don't have a following, a lot of them will probably not bother to self-publish. And I get that. I understand that. But like because I have a following and because, I'm pretty comfortable just in terms of what my day job is, it's like I have the money to and the experience and I have the time to dedicate to promoting books that I've written, even if they're just self-published. So because I telework, so I basically, I have all this time at home, so there's like really no harm to just publishing and focusing on editing and writing and things like that. I say, well, I'm technically on my work hours, but it's fine. It's whatever. Um, but I mean, yeah, I don't think I'd ever write a book that I didn't intend to publish in some form because I have the audience. I might as well use it. And in terms of trad publishing, it's like, not every book is going to be trad published. That's just how the market works. Sometimes they don't want you, sometimes they do. And, I'll admit too that I have this sort of like fever dream of, doing something like The Martian where it's like you don't expect it to be a success, but then suddenly it just blows up overnight. That stuff happens. Sometimes you just have to get your work out in the world, and sometimes a random person just has to run across it and say, "Oh my God, I love this. Maybe I should reach out to that person." And again, everybody has this dream that when they self-publish, that like, oh, maybe a movie studio will reach out to me and want to adapt it. And it's probably not likely to happen, but it's still, it's better than if it just sat in your closet, right? It's better to have it out there where people can see it. And the funny thing to me is I haven't promoted Memoirs of the Mausoleum in a while. It's been like ages since I wrote that, but I still get like sales every once in a while. Every time I see it, it makes me a little happy. It's like, oh, someone's still finding my books, like, somewhere. And like that to me is just incredible, where it's like, even if you're not actively promoting it, someone out there is going to see the story and actually want it and like it. So I actually got a review recently that like I was shocked at, because again, I haven't published. This book was published in like 20. The last book was published in 2018. Gallows Humor itself was published in 2016. I actually got a review from someone who said, "I just reread this series and it's incredible how like the author thought ahead and like had all these like wonderful hints, and it all came together and it clicked, and I just wanted to reread it, and I suddenly was noticing things I'd never noticed before, all this like foreshadowing and stuff." And I was like what a nice thing to say, like, in terms of reviews. And also like someone is still coming back to that story even after all these years and saying like, I really appreciated this. And it's like that kind of thing is what I live for as a writer. Like, as much as we as writers would love to be, millionaire writers who are like, have like a multi-book deal and have like a, a major studio making our stories, most of us are just going to be kind of like, we're going to be the smaller writers, we're going to be the mid writers who make a good amount of money, or even not even that much money, but it's kind of about the passion of it, and it's kind of about the hope that, people will see it for what it is, even if it's not like, even if it's not like Stephen King levels of people who know your name. At least having one or two people who really just love and are passionate about your work. That's what like makes it really worth it. And just, that's what makes all of the sort of suffering of revising and editing. That's what makes it like really great. And that's why I really prefer to put it out there rather than just shelve it.
Makes sense. Yeah, we're all. I think all writers are on that hamster wheel, kind of desperately chasing the praise and approval of strangers and everything. Yeah, I know what you mean. But and then I suppose one reason I asked that question is I suppose just my own experience. I kind of write some quite transgressive or extreme elements in some of my fiction, and even if I wouldn't want to shelve a book, I do sometimes find I might kind of tone down certain scenes within a book, if that makes sense. It's something I've been looking at, kind of going through the revision as well. Like if all the content is really justified within the novel, or can it be, does everything need to be there, or can I kind of stand over it? Like, but I don't know, have you had that experience where you felt you had to cut out a scene, not because you didn't like it, but because you felt it might be too much for an audience, or
um You know, this is funny to me. I actually, when I was first writing, like I was writing my first novel, my first series. I was a very edgy teen. I didn't, well, I mean, I was suffering from depression, and I had a lot of issues with like ADHD and sort of emotional like outbursts growing up, and like my writing was kind of my escape from that. And a lot of that was that resulted in a lot of very dark, angsty, and violent writing. That's my first series was a horror series because it was in this very like it was the mausoleum, right? It's basically like this underground lab facility where they sort of grow these supernatural entities known as revenants. And it's a pretty violent series. I can look back on it sometimes and I kind of like cringe just because my mom read it. Like some of my friends read it. Her friends read it. All of these older people who don't really understand the sort of like angsty teen angle that I was doing really there. So in terms of like censoring or getting rid of scenes that just didn't fit or was too much for audiences, no, I was very unrestrained in my first book. I didn't really know any better. I was kind of this dumb teenager who was just putting their heart out into the world and hoping that it would like it, right? And I mean I think that though that there was never like anything that was like gratuitous though. Like for the most part it had some kind of purpose. It wasn't just violence for the sake of it. It was never like it was always kind of like I want to say it was more on the emotional, psychological side anyway. Like a lot of the violence was really just related to like the things that were happening in the story. I know some writers, they get flack for adding things that like sort of trigger other people, like, anything that's like sexual abuse content or certain types of violence that go over the top. To be honest, I never really found those kind of things appealing. And like, I never really wrote anything that I think would be super controversial for the most part. And like, I fully don't I fully support like people writing what they want to write. Like, and I know that maybe sometimes that's controversial. Like there's a lot of people who say like, well, you shouldn't write certain content or you shouldn't write things like this. And it's like I agree with you on some elements. Like you shouldn't write like racial content if you are not part of that race. You should not write like slurs and like certain types of like bigotry if all you're doing is contributing to that. Like there are people who write like negative racial stereotypes and they say like, well, I have the right to make whatever content I want. And it's like, yeah, sure, but that's also like if it's a symptom of your greater racism, then you need to like ask yourself seriously why you need to put more racist content out there. So, but for me, it's like, in terms of like darker, edgier content, like I always wonder why all these smaller creators get, ragged on and like attacked for making controversial stuff when something as big as like say Game of Thrones is like a massively popular IP and it has some of the most controversial like scenes and content in it, and it's like why is he allowed to do that, like, and like he doesn't get criticized except for by like fringe groups, but for the most part he kind of has the freedom, George R. R. Martin, right? He has the freedom to write all kinds of things that people find objectionable, but they still find it interesting. So why do smaller content creators, especially POC, why can't they write stuff that is more, forbidden fruit that's like, taboo? Like why can't they write the same stuff? But the only reason they get attacked is because people perceive them as being closer to them. Like they're lower to the ground. George R. R. Martin's on a pedestal, right? So that to me has always like bothered me because I see that on Twitter all the time where people say like, why would you ever write incest into a novel? And it's just like, I mean, I don't like incest content. It does make my skin crawl, but like I like, not writing about incest content in fiction isn't going to make it go away. It's a symptom of a disease. And that's like, it's not the disease itself. That's the thing that annoys me because people will say like, like they'll even go as far as saying like, oh, there should be nasty, toxic people in fiction. And it's like, there are villains. Like that's what, they drive the conflict. The conflict is nastiness. Like I'm sorry to tell you this, but a story where you just go to a coffee shop, you drink your coffee and you leave. That's not a story. Like you have to have people who are pushing other people, and having a true villain is acknowledging that sometimes they're gonna be problematic. They have to cause problems. So to me, sorry, I got off a little off topic there, but for me, it's
Oh no,
like,
I think it's all relevant. It's all
you know,
relevant. Yeah, I do write about topics that are quite problematic. I do touch on things like abuse or prejudice or racism. I mean, I'm
yeah,
only writing from my own perspective. Like I mean, I'm a cis white male. Like, so I'm quite open about the fact that I don't have lived experience about of some of the things I write about. But yeah, I'm writing about them in kind of a fictional space. I'm certainly not trying to contribute to some of these problematic. I mean, the whole idea is just satirizing them, or again, there are villainous characters who do these kind of problematic things, and yeah, I mean, it's not for everyone, but not everything has to be for everyone. you know
yeah,
it's like you just going back to romance, like, I mean, the idea of knowing that a book will have a happy ending just isn't for me, but I can understand that that really works well for some people. They like having that expectation, so great. I mean, if people get something out of that, who might stop them?
yeah. Well, I laugh a little bit on the romance, and just because I remember thinking like, they say that happily ever after is required for romance. Okay, but some of the best romances are tragic romances where they don't get to be together. It's like, sometimes it's about the yearning and like that, I always think about this where gothic romances, right? Like people forget that the term romance, right? It didn't mean what it means today. Like romance used to just mean like the outlandish, the ridiculous and the overly emotional, the melodramatic. It wasn't about romance itself was not about wholesome hand holding. It was about this man is so obsessed with this woman that he's stalking her like a psychopath. And, the ending is that, she kills herself, and in his grief he kills himself. It was about like taking all of those dirty feelings inside of yourself and making this melodrama out of it. And like a lot of gothic romances are not like really romantic. Like I think of like something like Wuthering Heights, where like people remember it as being romantic, and some people even call it a romance, kind of like what they call Romeo and Juliet a romance, even though technically it's not. It's just funny to me because Wuthering Heights, like, it's like the most toxic man you've ever met, like Heathcliff, but it's kind of beautiful how he says, like, there's like a line I remember where he says to like Catherine, he says something like, um, you know, the murdered sometimes haunt their murderers, right? So haunt me just as long as you don't like leave me. It's like it's the drama behind it. Like they're not together. They didn't get to be together because she chose someone else. But it's about his like hatred and his love sort of turning like they basically make everyone after him suffer for his like for her crimes. And it's like I actually really like that. It's like I feel like the emotion is more raw when they can't be together. Like it's a lot more fascinating to me when they can't. And some of the best romance lines out there were not from romances. So anyway, though, that's sort of my ongoing civil war with certain romance writers, just because they annoy me. They say like, oh, romance is so beautiful and so deep, and other genres just don't get it. It's like I've read better romances in like sci-fi and fantasy than I've read like just straight romances. So that's just for
Okay.
me. I never read a straight romance. I'm not too into just the romance as a genre. So
Okay. I don't want to
anyway, sorry.
declare romance, declare war on romance anyway, contemporary romance. But I suppose we've touched on this a bit already. But would you like to talk a bit more about any future plans you have for your writing?
um yeah, I have a lot of different like projects on the back burner. So the two projects I have most that I most want to focus on, and I'm in the process of writing. So Seven Deadly Habits obviously has a couple of sequels, and I do want to write those, but I might take a little bit of a break if it's not like as big of a success as I'd like it to be. I might just like sort of release that more like every once in a while. But like my main focus is I have two standalone books that I'd like to traditionally publish. One is a story that's basically a sci-fi speculative novel, which is about like what if like video games were like sort of reality, and like it's kind of like a Free Guys kind of situation where it's like how would it be like if these video game characters were like real people who were just like living in a video game. But the difference for this one is that there are different servers, so there's multiple worlds that you can go into. Like say you have an RPG in one world, and then you have a competitive FPS in another world. And like the whole premise is that this dating sims character gets kind of kidnapped from his world. He gets thrown into one of those kind of fighting games, and of course he has no experience whatsoever. He's thrown into like a battle royale sort of like fight to the death arena, and he has to like sort of make friends and like manipulate his way into surviving, because in certain servers death is not enabled, so you can't die in those servers. In other servers death is obviously enabled, so he's very concerned because he's in a world where death is enabled, and he's like, oh shit, I've never been able to die before. So it's very I'm excited to work some more on it. I already wrote some of it, but I wasn't super pleased with it, so I'll probably end up rewriting that later. But I have all these characters in place and all of these like and it's actually a very self-contained story. Like normally I write series, but for this one it's very much a standalone book. So I want to traditionally publish that one. And that one honestly, I doubt I'd self-publish that one. So I guess back on this, question you had earlier, where it's like, would you, not, would you shelve certain books? There's some books I would rather not like self-publish. So I'd rather rewrite them and try to get them published later than, try to just throw them out there at the world, too soon. That's one project I'm working on. I'm a big fan of video games, so obviously, I like the language, and I have a lot of in jokes where, um, I guess a lot of the video game stories that you see today, a lot of them are kind of written by like people who half understand and half don't. So like I mentioned Free Guy, right? Free Guy was actually a pretty decent movie, but it definitely had the sort of more older generation slash boomer audience in mind, because there's a lot of like there's like this preconception that like is wrong, and kind of like like there's this idea that boomers like to say, which is like video games cause violence, like they're encouraging kids to shoot people and drive cars into the police stations, and it's basically like a comment on GTA specifically. Like GTA, in that game obviously you can kill people just on the street, and again, I whatever on that, to be honest. Like, again, shooting someone in a video game is so different from shooting someone in real life. Like, I don't think for a second that kids playing it are gonna just be more inclined to kill someone if they aren't would already inclined. Um, but in Free
Is that
Guy, you
from
could see
personal
that.
experience or?
Well, yeah. Um, but like in Free Guy, they had this like thing that kind of was annoying to me, where like the whole premise was like, what if people didn't kill each other in video games? What if we were all just nice and we had a little society? And to me, it was a little silly because it's like, yeah, but like shooting someone in like Apex Legends or Overwatch, like it's a colorful cartoon game where cartoon violence happens. It's not like it really isn't like at the gore fest that like older generations seem to think it is. So that generational disconnect was there. But the thing is though that even with Free Guy though, I could sense that like there were younger audiences like and they were in mind, and there were also younger people writing it because they actually had a lot of references to stuff that only people who play video games would really get. Like I remember I was really proud of them because there was like one scene where like in video games there's like an invisible wall that you can't go past because the developer didn't create a world past that. And the in the game in the movie they're running around trying to find that wall because they're trying to find the limit of the game, and they said like, oh shoot, there's the collision mesh. And like I remember thinking like, oh, that's cute though, because that's someone who actually knows something about video games talking about collision meshing like that, because that's basically just the invisible area where you can't go because they put a boundary there so that you can't clip through the world, right? And like to me that was just funny. And like there's a lot of other like little moments like that where like you can see that they actually like cared. Oh, another one was that the game is super popular and the main developer is getting mad about it for reasons related to the movie. He goes and he starts axing the server rooms for the game, like with an actual axe. Like he's like hitting servers. And like to me that was funny because a lot of older people don't know how games work. They think that a video game is just some magical cloud thing that you can access that's just living in the sky. It's connected to a physical like database. It's connected to like a physical location. If those servers got messed up, then nobody would be able to play the game. So like
Yeah, yeah.
everything, yeah. So just to me that was like this disconnect, and that's why I wanted to write the video game story, just because it's like I want to bring a younger perspective to it while also kind of like still having the fun parts that and anyone would be able to recognize as fun. Having like characters, you know sort of living like changing worlds, and you getting to see like all like this like kind of rich story about like the different types of games and how they would like be represented in like reality. So it's very much like a unreality kind of thing, and I can't wait to work more on that. uh the other project is also a standalone, and that's the one I'm most excited to query because I think that this one might be the one that gets more attention than my previous two books. Basically a another sci-fi story, just because I love sci-fi. And it's basically this like a sentient virus. And I fully admit that this might be a little hard to sell because people are a little bit tired of COVID stories, but it's not really like that. So it's like a sentient
Okay.
virus that humankind kind of befriended a long time ago. And like unlike normal viruses, again, it's sentient for one thing, and it humans sort of chose to become its host, and basically it gives them special the ability to sort of assimilate other life forms, and even even non-life forms. It basically gives you powers to like replicate the other creatures that you come in contact with, or like plants, animals. And it's about these 12 ships that basically fly around the universe because humankind does not have a home planet. And it's basically about these sort of like, it's kind of like Battlestar Galactica. I don't know if you're a fan of Battlestar, but it's kind of like this idea of like these constantly nomadic humans. They have this sentient disease, and the reason that they can't have a homeland is because other species don't really trust them. They're kind of afraid of the virus, even though the virus doesn't like hurt people anymore now that it has a host. And like the it's kind of like the comp titles I had for it were kind of Battlestar meets X-Men, because the main characters are all sort of teenagers. They all have to sort of learn how to use their powers. They have to like, and they all have different like niches and traits that they've gathered from whatever planet they came from. So they all have powers based on like organic life forms. And again, this goes back to sort of Mercury class, where it's like I love writing about humans that can sort of become monsters. It's kind of in that same vein, although it's not quite monsters in this case. It's just more like traits. um but like I don't know, I'm excited to write that one, mostly just because I just thought it would be really interesting if there was like, I guess the virus angle is interesting to me, just because like I've never really seen a lot of like stories about like what if this like sort of disease was sentient, and what if it was like friendly? What if it was like not like what if because like I guess when you when most sci-fi writers write a disease, it's just a disease. It's just something you have to cure, it's something you have to get rid of. I thought like it'd be interesting if like, I'm a big fan of Star Trek, right? A big like tenet of Star Trek is like, well, what kind of life form would we encounter out in the galaxy? There's all kinds, right? So
So
like
you're
what
thinking
if it
about
was
what if
kind of
the disease is basically like a character with
yeah,
a
yeah.
character within your story. Okay.
Yeah, so it's basically something that you can speak with. It's something that is capable of recognizing intelligent life. And like I always thought it'd be cool if, if you could give a life form like a really unique form. Like it's not just an animal, or it's not just a human-shaped creature that you can speak with and hold your hands. What if it's something that's so different from you that you couldn't imagine being anything like it? But at the same time, if it's not trying to hurt you, if you can actually befriend it, why not befriend it, right? Like when it comes to sci-fi, I always like stories where the main idea is that human beings are like compassionate and able to understand other creatures. They're able to understand like, other sentient life forms. I really wanted to write a story where it was like, what if we were able to befriend something that people traditionally associate with being like the ultimate kind of, neutral evil? And that would be a disease. And again, I admit that, with COVID going around, people probably might not like be that receptive to the idea, but like, again, it is sci-fi, and I did really want to like lean on this angle of like, you know, in the future, maybe we would be open to like befriending anything that was capable of befriending us. And,
Mm.
to me, that's the most natural enemy of most books, which would be a type of virus species. So, um, anyway though, so I'm really excited to work on that one because it's a young adult. So, I feel like I might have more luck in that market. I've mostly been marketing adult books. Um, and it's about a bunch of teenagers who are, getting into this sort of it's a bit of a coming of age novel, but not like too much on that angle, just because I never really liked coming of age too much. But it's got a colorful cast of people with different, organic traits that they've copied from different planets. And I just think, and this is something I didn't even bring up. So, like, in this sort of like the virus kind of has another sort of side ability besides the replicating. It gives human beings sort of like a telepathic connection to one another, since, they all share the same host, they're all the host of the same disease. And I have this sort of like I have this sort of secondary superpower, which is basically that, if you are close enough to another person, like if you have a strong telepathic bond with them, it'll become even more powerful with time. And basically, you can be able to communicate. You're able to communicate with someone from a much further distance the more you know them. And to me, that's like such a rich story idea, because you can have the characters growing and learning about each other, and their powers as like telepaths will grow the more they know each other. And like, to me, it's like there's so many things I can do with that. I can just play with that
Yeah, you can
a
explore
lot
that quite a lot. Yeah, there's an awful lot of things that can happen with it.
with that. Yeah. So
Yeah.
the two different abilities I think will be fun. And unlike other stories, I planned this one out a lot more. Like I'm more of a pantser than a plotter. So
Mm.
I know some people like to write the whole outline and then they follow the outline. I actually don't really write outlines. I just say, you know what, let's just write that today. I write a scene and then I write the next scene, and that's how the story kind of comes together. It's like I just throw blocks at each other and they come together in like a little shape. For this one, I had to plan it out a lot more because, again, I'm trying to get it trad published, and I'm trying to have it be a little bit more coherent to the average man than I normally do. And for this story, it's like, some of it's a murder mystery, some of it is, a fun adventure at the academy, kind of like, uh, the Ursula Le Guin or, Harry Potter angle, right? And like, so I have to like juggle those things, and that's why I have to plan it out because I have to like actually say like this is when this happens. So I'm more focused on plotting and pacing, and that'll be interesting for me because we'll see if that gets me any success in the Chad published arena. But
Yeah,
anyway,
it's interesting sort of having that as your as a goal, like can affect the process of writing itself, which makes sense. Like, yeah, I'd certainly be, yeah, I'd be curious. I'd definitely be curious to see this book when it's out in the world. Yeah.
oh yeah, it's about halfway written. I
Good.
was going to write I was going to finish it, and then I realized a little late that I needed to start editing Seven Habits much sooner. Like I realized, oh shoot, I need to edit that before I publish that. I need to edit it one more time. And I realized I gotta take a break on it. But oh, and also, I had to rewrite that one too. I don't think I said that. I originally wrote it. I wrote like 40,000 words of it, and it was going pretty well. Like I liked how it was going, but then like I scrapped it because I had to start writing Seven Habits too, and then when I came back to it, I realized, shoot, I want this to be trad published. I don't want this to come across the way the other one did. So let me totally rewrite my like I had to change my writing style completely, and that was like challenging, but like also kind of fun. I totally had to like revamp how I presented it. And as I was writing it, I was like, this is actually kind of better. Like I kind of like this style a little bit better. So that but so that's like, you know, my sort of like final words just on like the disease story that like um my writing style has always been like from the heart, and that
Mm,
basically means that it's a bit messy. It's basically
okay.
like, you know, it's a lot of like I guess you could call it like what is that? I'm trying to think of the term for when it's like oh, stream of consciousness. So like seven like
Yeah.
so Gallows humor had some stream of consciousness stuff, and a lot of it could be a little bit nonsensical. But like I, you know, I've kind of leaned away from that, and like with my new books, it's very much like more straightforward. It's more like this is what's happening. It's not just like a interpret it at your own risk
Okay.
here. So like I'd say that the disease story is definitely my most standard writing yet, where it kind of starts off with like, so in the beginning, you know, it basically
Right.
just
Yeah. Yeah.
gives you a
It's a
rundown.
more of a
Yeah,
linear sort of narrative. Yeah. So it's
yeah,
kind of an easier sell. But that, I
yeah.
guess that makes sense if you've got that kind of end goal of trying to appeal kind of to yeah,
Trad
traditional
publishing. Yeah,
publishing. Yeah. But
because you know.
thanks very much for joining today. Was there anything last thing you'd like to add for the interview or?
No, but not really. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for listening to me ramble. Apologize, I did go
No,
off topic a bit.
it's really interesting as to your ideas around writing and your future plans. So yeah, thanks everyone for listening. If you like this, do please like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks. We'll be talking again next time.